New York back in the late 70s and 80s. There was the drugs, there was a crime, there was stabbing, shootings. How accurate is that?
Very accurate. It was scary walking around at night. The general lawlessness was, there was a lot of crime, but then you felt like you could do what you wanted to. I lived on the corner in New York. There were two gangs. Each one had a brand of coke and a brand of heroin with a stamp. 6 or 7 other corners like that, and a lot of empty buildings. But then, walking around the streets at night, you see one of his shadow figures. That was, 5 years before I even met Richard. And the more I saw them, the more movement they had, and I finally got to meet him.
We have been promoting the Richard Hambleton market and his artwork since 2014. We pride ourselves on delivering content and educating our audience. So, I interviewed recently a man called Ben Buchanan. He's a former friend of Richard Hambleton. We spoke about the friendship that he had with him, but also collecting his artwork and some of the places that they used to socialise together. Hope you enjoy this exclusive interview.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have another great guest in front of me. As everybody knows, Woodbury House is a brand that I founded back in 2014. Right place, right time, I would say. I was approached by a very large art dealer who was representing a guy called Richard Hambleton, or how he presented it to me, the Godfather street art, which was coined by the New York Times on more than one occasion. And then over the years, since I've been studying the Richard Hambleton market, quite naturally I've connected to some of his affiliates, his old art dealers, even his dentist, his doctor, former barber, etc. And the gentleman in front of me, Mr. Ben Buchanan, has been down to our studio once before. We've stayed connected. You were a friend of Richard Hambleton's and also a few of his affiliates back in the 80s. Got some really cool stories. So I think bringing those stories to the forefront, educating the audience and giving people a bit more value to understanding why Richard Hambleton done and thought what he thought and done what he done and led the life that he did. I think it gives people a lot more substance to it. So thank you very much for your time, Ben, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you, mate.
Great, nice to meet you.
So I would label you as a photographer, an artist in your own right, conservation sort of specialist. So is that what sort of got you into those circles back in the 80s with people like Keith Haring, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Richard Hambleton, etc., or was it more like a personal friendship type of thing?
I suppose it was the photography. I met Richard when I was in Los Angeles. I went there for a holiday. I was already a photographer, and I got invited to the Details Party, which is the New York style fashion magazine that I did a monthly page of photographs for, of night art scene. They brought some New York artists to Los Angeles. Keith Haring was there, Richard Hambleton was there, and they had their artist stuff around on the walls. And so I got to meet them there, but I already knew Keith from New York anyway.
Okay.
And so I knew, and the people that were having the party were my friends. So I got to meet Richard there. He was dating this girl that I really liked. So I was like, oh, you're there. I see. And we went out and had parties and lunches afterwards. After that.
Okay.
And when I moved back to New York, Richard phoned me and he said, oh, I'm having a dinner, come over. And so I did. Going to Richard's dinners were fun. There's always, about 10, 15 people. Often it was his girlfriend doing the cooking, and or if not, then he would run out and buy some food and pretend he had cooked it. So it was kind of a potluck kind of thing.
So was he quite witty and he had a bit of humour on him?
Yeah, he did. He had a car that he painted matte black. And he had the aerials, he bent up the aerials so they faced forward, so completely the opposite, unstreamlined view. And we'd cruise around New York and go to bars and clubs and things, and generally just hang out.
What was so back in the 80s? When was you living there?
I was living there. I was sort of living there, mostly in New York. I'd go to Los Angeles quite a lot anyway. My mother lived in Los Angeles. I had friends there.
Yeah.
I'd lived there in like 1979. And before that, I was living in San Francisco where I met Eric Good, who owns the club area.
Okay. Because what I was going to get to is the Shadow Man documentary. Certainly the trailer does quite a good job on giving you this impression how New York was back in the late 70s and 80s. And going off of that, and maybe some other bits of content and write-ups that you can see on the internet, it appeared to be, in certainly parts of New York, quite an edgy, chaotic, in some cases dangerous area, because there was the drugs, there was a crime, there was prostitution, there was gangs, there was stabbings, shootings. And I've interviewed a few of the New York street artists, and they did say there was a lot of crime. But someone who was living there, how accurate is that?
I would say that was very accurate. It was scary walking around at night down certain areas. The Lower East Side and the East Village was one of them, and I sort of lived right on the edge of it. Walking around at night, or getting home very late at night, taxi drivers wouldn't come to Avenue B where I lived. They would take you as far as Avenue A, and they wouldn't take you below Houston. You'd have to get off and walk. But rents were cheap, so that made up for it. The general lawlessness was, there was a lot of crime, but then you felt like you could do what you wanted to. You had huge spaces. If you wanted to have a club or a party or, do something crazy, you could do it, because the police weren't really interested in wacky artists doing things or having parties or painting on the street, or they were interested in, people shooting each other. They weren't really even interested in the drug dealing, because that was just a day-to-day thing. While I lived on the corner in New York, there were two gangs. Each one had two brands, a brand of coke and a brand of heroin with a stamp on it. There was one gang was called 357. They had a picture of the 357 Magnum on the stamp. And the other gang was special delivery, a post office special delivery stamp on it. And there would be queues of people lining up to go into the shooting galleries. And that was just my corner. Then there were like 6 or 7 other corners like that, and a lot of empty buildings.
Derelict
buildings where they have shooting galleries. There was a shooting gallery a few doors down called Toilet. It's because they got the water for the syringes from this broken toilet, so there was fresh water coming up. So
Wow.
I never went into those because they just looked too sketchy. Yeah. And the people were lining up to look really sketchy. And they'd be lining up when it was, 10 below freezing as well.
Anything to get their hit.
Anything to get their hit. But then, walking around the streets at night, you see one of his shadow figures. That was, 5 years before I even met Richard. I didn't know who did them, but the first time I saw it was out of the corner of my eye. I just thought, what was that? And I thought, oh no, it's just some wacky artist doing some nutty thing. I'd see them all over, and then I saw them in Los Angeles, and I saw them in London, I saw them all over the place. Oh, that's the same guy. He really gets around, or he's got friends doing it or something. And then I finally got to meet him. In fact, I have a picture of me posing with one of them that was on my street. And that was before I met him. That was like 5 years before I met him.
When you saw one of the first shadow figures, what was your natural impression of it?
I thought, yeah, it works. I don't know if it's art, but it's just, somebody like a Rolf Harris. It was just like splish splash, but they actually had a movement to them. And the more I saw them, the more movement they had. And then gradually other graffiti artists came along, or other artists came and put other things, added their bit to it. There's one I have a picture of that's got one that I think Jean-Michel did. He did a face on the top of it.
Like a skull?
Yeah. And there's a couple he did like that. And then there's others, and people put like those sort of antenna ears on them, and a phone in the hand of one of them. Somebody stenciled a phone because it looks like it's holding a phone. Yeah. And, they get covered up after a while. But, there was one in my corner.
So I'm quite intrigued about this whole, drugs, because again, I've spoken to a lot of artists and they all say the same thing. Drugs was a big culture, and it was almost like if you escaped the crime or the gangs or the violence, then the other thing that people found it hard to escape, because no matter whether you're on the streets, no matter whether you're in a club, drugs, even still today, around the world, certainly westernized world, is a big thing. But it seemed like Richard, Jean-Michel, Keith Haring, a lot of them were using very, very hard drugs such as heroin. So was it just kind of common that most of these artists were doing it?
I wouldn't say it was common, but I mean, I didn't see Jean-Michel taking drugs, and we smoked a joint once together, but it was so strong I had to go and lie down in my darkroom because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even take pictures. I was like, okay, I'll come back in half an hour. I need to just lie down. And it was at the club, and he was coming during the day to paint. But I was just standing next to him and talking, and he just handed me this joint. I thought, oh, that smells nice. And then I was like, oh, shit, why did I do that? But, obviously maybe not in public view. He was doing a lot. And, he was still a sweet guy. He was very shy. He was, I think he took a shine to me because I never asked him for anything. I never said, can you sign this or, do something. I was just came to talk to him, took a couple of pictures and walked away. That was it. In fact, he wanted to sign my shirt. He was signing, and I said, "No, that's my favorite shirt. No, I can't. You can't sign that." And it never occurred to me that he was going to die, and this era of New York, the '80s, was going to end. I just thought, oh, this is how it's always going to be. Fabulous art everywhere, cheap rents, great happenings, great clubs.
Yeah.
Access to all those artists because they weren't hidden behind PR people or their galleries, and so it was a fairly free time.
So you knew Jean-Michel, obviously shared that joint with him. There's probably other occasions where you met up with him and spoke, and Keith Haring, and then obviously Hambleton. I mean, out of the three, who was you more close with?
Probably Hambleton.
Okay.
Because I went to his studio quite a lot, and sometimes I'd just go there and hang out and just watch him paint, or you'd ask him, what I thought of a new idea he had. He made all these little gold leaf sculptures out of things, and he'd gold leaf them and splash some paint on them. Didn't like those as much as the other big paintings. He started to do these rainy seascape landscapes, which I really liked. Some with big black lines through them. Those are my favorite. Yeah. And I couldn't really afford to buy art at that time, and we never discussed, trading them or anything. It wasn't until later on that he came, when he got too hard up for money, after he fell out with everybody, he would come ringing my doorbell at like 2 or 3 in the morning saying, "Do you want to buy a painting?" And the first time he was like, "Well, how much?" He said, $100. And I was like, okay, got $100. And I got this gold head, a gold background, black head. And then, a few weeks later, he came by with the canvas, the beautiful woman walking picture. And he said, "Well, can you buy a painting?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. How much is it?" And he was like, "About $300. And I was like, "I don't have $300. He said, "Well, how much have you got?" And I said, "About 180. And he said, "Okay, I'll take it." And anyway, exchanged. I was a bit bleary-eyed. I was a bit sleeping. So, and then he'd come by, like quite often, but I didn't have money to spend on art, and I just stopped answering the bell after a while, or told him I didn't have any money to buy any more pictures. Yeah. And I thought, well, I've got 2. That's enough. And I just put them on a shelf in the dark room somewhere and sort of forgot about them for 20 years or something. Yeah. Not realizing that when I went to look at them, that he hadn't signed either of them. So then I was like, I need to get these signed. So that was another whole palaver when I went to New York, like a couple of times, because I just thought, well, I should get them signed, because every time I'd see Richard, he always looked like he was about 1 week away from death. Maybe he could have behaved like that night, but that went on for 20 years. I thought, he won't make it through the week. He won't make it through the month. A year later, I'd see him 2 years later, and each time he's just more and more kind of like on the edge. But that went on for 20 years. I mean, he did more drugs than anybody, more than Keith Richards, more than, certainly more than his fair share. And anyway, coming to New York, I had to come 3 times to get him to sign the picture. I come ringing the bell and he wasn't there, and then he's saying, we'll come back next week, or come back later tonight, or, I come back and he wouldn't be there. And then finally I got to, junkies are very unreliable. Finally he was there and he signed it, and he said, this is a really good picture.
So, I mean, I know we've discussed you're not per se an art expert, but you've been around these artists. I mean, would you have ever thought that buying these works off of Hambleton just because he needed some money was knocking on your door 2-3 o'clock in the morning? I mean, what a weird way to sell a piece of art, but hey ho, each to their own.
He probably had a route. Yeah, he probably went round several people's doorbell ringing and who was in.
Yeah. But now, I mean, I think the Shadow Women over here in our studio, I mean, these are now trading up to like 200,000 in the private domain, and they're very, very sought after. And I think even though having something signed and dated is not always the be all and end all of art, because one big piece by Hambleton, a seascape called Mutiny, sold in 2019 in Phillips auction for $500,000. That was unsigned and undated. However, I do think a lot of collectors prefer it to be signed and dated somewhere, so I think that's a smart move. I mean, do you ever think I got these for a few hundred, and now they're trading at hundreds of thousands? What's your kind of gut reaction to that?
Well, I think I sold the Hambleton for me at the right time, because I needed the money at that time. Probably if I hadn't, maybe I would have still have it, because it started to grow on me. I still have, and I thought, well, I don't mind getting rid of it. I still have the head, and I have half a share in another one, which is a nuclear bomb, which nobody's really seen, and it's a beautiful painting. And it's also unsigned. It's on a big board though. It's quite heavy.
Okay.
And the head's not signed either. But anyway, I've still got them. And so I thought, well, that's still got something to remember him by, apart from the pictures. I have the pictures.
Yeah.
I had a few small Basquiat things as well. I probably sold those too early. One's on show in New York as well at the moment.
Okay.
At the Namad Gallery.
Okay.
Apparently they have more Basquiats than anybody else. But somebody told me they saw it there, and they licensed some of my pictures for their film, a video and catalogue.
Okay. Okay. So in comparison to Richard, Keith Haring, Jean-Michel Basquiat, how were their personalities different? And then what were they like just as individuals? Like, how did they hold themselves? I know you said Jean-Michel Basquiat was quite timid and quite shy. But, when you look at it from how the PR companies portrayed him, it was almost like he was quite flamboyant and quite, not obnoxious, but I've heard like a few people that he could be quite diva-ish at times. He
was sort of shy but mischievous. I've got some pictures of him where he was mucking about, but he didn't talk a lot, and when he did talk, you listened. And I think he was happiest when he was just like dabbing, painting, and being left alone, listening to music. Music is a big part of his work. It's often centered around that, and that would inspire him to do paintings. I did have all of his record collection at one point, because after he died and the family cleared his studio, Eric and I rented his studio. And so it was just an empty studio, and all that was left was 3 crates of his records. And so I got those. And then we moved into the studio. I used the basement as a dark room. Eric used the first floor. And the ground floor is his office, and he lived there.
Yeah.
But his record, he had a great record collection. There was all sorts of interesting, eccentric, eclectic music types.
And Keith Haring, what was he like?
He was a very kind of light personality. Like, he was always in a good mood, and he was always, his hands would never stop moving. Like, he was always doodling or drawing on everything. And I got some fun pictures of him, and you say, let's take a picture, and he would say, oh, let's do this, or let's try this, and and hi, how are you? And
quite confident.
I mean, he was also, I think, probably maybe not as shy, but I think being the only gay one, he had to sort of overcome sort of shyness more or something. I didn't know him that well just from being out and about. I think he was quite comfortable just doodling and drawing, and I mean, he liked all the trappings and the money as well, but for him, I don't think that was the main thing. I guess all the artists, the main thing wasn't art or money, sorry. I mean, if you were Hambleton, you wanted to make money, you wouldn't be painting on the side of buildings, because you can't make money that way.
Yeah.
It's only when he showed me he said, what do you think about these? And there were these paintings he'd done on this very thin paper that folded up into a box.
The Nightlife originals. We got we done a show in 2020. I don't know if this was after you came to us, but we done a show there at the Saatchi
I think
Gallery.
that's how I met you, because I wanted to come to the show, and then I didn't. Then I ran out of time, and I couldn't get there. But
yeah. We had 22, I think, on display. Now we've got 31 under management.
How many were there originally?
53.
53.
Yeah, we're still trying to.
And each one was an original piece. Right?
Original, yeah. So 53 done. All was on this Japanese kimwashi paper attached to a booklet. They all folded away.
Into a box, right? Like the size of an LP, if I remember.
Exactly right. So the box is signed and dated. The actual booklet, which the artwork is attached on, is signed and dated, from 1985. Really cool pieces. And what our mission is now is to go out there to try and discover the remaining missing ones, like family members, and bring them all back together and do another show for them. I think they're really, really cool. And I think an important part to his market, because it's a transition piece. He was going from the streets of New York down to more of a commercial route, I would say.
Yeah,
and
trying to pay his rent with it, which is, why not?
Yeah. And I think, doing the street art, I think it's almost like the modern day, it was at the time, the modern day social media, because you would do stuff on the streets, not necessarily to get paid, but to get noticed. And then that should funnel people's interest towards that artist. Then they can go to the galleries where they're being represented, or to the managers or art dealers, or to the artist herself, and conjure up this relationship. And then off the back end of that, maybe buy some artworks. Whereas now we've got social media, and people just look on there, and that's how people promote themselves, So Hambleton, I mean, you mentioned off air about going into some of the galleries that he was represented by. I mean, did Hambleton have a love for money, or was it just all about the art for him?
No, I think he liked the I think he liked a bit of the fame, even though he pretended to be like this sort of shadow character, but he kind of liked being out there. He liked going to clubs, he liked going to restaurants, he liked having a car, he liked having this big 3-floor studio on Christie Street, and he had a good gallery up on 47th Street, I think it was, or 57th Street, a blue chip art gallery. But he lost that once I think he started to get into drugs, and he was becoming unreliable. And then gradually he moved to, smaller galleries. But, his prices were quite high for that time. He was getting more money than, I think, $40,000-$50,000 for a painting.
Which is astronomical amount of money. I mean, if you know, it depends on who the person is, but if someone walked in to buy a piece of art for the first time at 40, 50,000, I know we're talking about dollars, not pounds, but you got to think, you know, that's a year to 2 years, sometimes someone's salary, you know, depending on where you are, what they do, or where they're situated around the country. You know, and you're talking about back in the 80s, you know, it's a ginormous amount of money.
Yeah, so it was gone up, and his prices are still high. And a friend who is an investment banker asked me who was a good artist to buy, and I said, "Oh, you should meet Richard. He does great paintings and great seascapes, landscapes." And I've never heard of him. Let's go to the studio and have a look. So he went, bought one for 10,000, and he had it, and then he kind of read about Richard going down the tubes, and then he tried to find him, and his prices had dropped down. And this guy was like, "Oh, I haven't been able to find Richard. I don't know if I want this painting anymore. Do you think he wants it back?" And I was like, "I don't know. I haven't seen him for a couple of years." And then he sounded very kind of disheartened by the whole thing. That was probably in the late 90s or something. And I was like, "Yeah, I know, it's sad. His prices have dropped. Everything's gone down for him." Anyway, if I find him again, I'll give him that 10,000 for that painting. But yeah, he should be happier now.
Yeah, if he's still got hold of it, I was going to say it's definitely for sure gone up in value. But I think on that note, you know, Richard Hambleton clearly was a good artist, but the problem is with art, any type of art, you got to have a good product. But if you're not promoting the product in the right way or working with the market, then you can quite easily find yourself, you know, hero to zero quite quickly. And I think, you know, another life lesson, drugs or alcohol, the moment it gets in your life and it becomes, you know, you're too caught up in that way, then all logical thinking goes out the window, and you're kind of emotionally driven towards your fixes all the time. And it happens to a lot of people, and I think Hambleton was definitely victim to that. Would you agree on that point?
Definitely. He had an addictive personality, and he couldn't control it. He couldn't, drugs kill, and it killed him. It killed his career earlier. But it revived. Luckily, he was there in the end to see it go back up. And, you know, it would have been sad for him to have died before it revived itself.
Yeah. And part of the revival of his market is there's a few things. I think Andy and Vladimir, they obviously done a good job of bringing him back to the market, connecting him to Giorgio Armani. They've done the 5 shows around the world, which I think was received very, very well. They had a lot of high-end, high-profile celebrities at these events. P. Diddy, Alicia Keys, Bruce Willis, etc. There's been some very, very serious people that collected his work. Obviously, the Amphar Film Festival charity, there was 2 pieces that sold for just shy of $1 million back then, which was, you know, quite a lot of money. And now since his death, you know, during the year of his death, the Shadow Man documentary came out, won an award, that Oren Jacobi shot and filmed, which was very successful. I still get people today watching it for the first time going, "Oh my God, this guy is literally the godfather of street art. He is the main kingpin." But sadly, the best career move an artist can make sometimes is when they pass away, Ben. And that is the brutal truth of it all, because if someone like a Damien Hirst or Jeff Koons or George Condo died today, for a fact the market would become alight, because so many big collectors will be jumping on it to buy something, because they know prices today are going to be wildly different in months to come or years to come.
Richard did live too long, unfortunately. I mean, it's a shame to say that. His prices would have gone up when, you know, everybody else died in the 80s, and, you know, their prices shot up because they weren't making any more. Well, Richard was making a lot of paintings. I mean, he wasn't into doing prints, and he wasn't into doing commercial things. He liked doing his paintings he's not doing any more paintings, so they've become very valuable now.
Yeah.
I think he may have done some prints. And but if you can't own a painting, a print's the next best thing. or a photograph.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I sell a lot of photographs of artists and those prices are going up. You know, they're 4, 5, 10 times what they were selling for. You know,
these
10.
are your photos
Of Basquiat, of Haring, of Richard, painting or just hanging out.
Yeah. And where are some of your photos being exhibited, or where they available?
At the Peter Harrington Gallery.
Nice.
They're the main ones. They're in Mayfair and South Kensington, and
What made you want
Tanya Baxter Gallery on the King's Road.
Okay. What made you want to get into like taking photos of artists?
I think I started taking pictures when I was about 15, 16. It was the only thing I quite liked doing, the only thing I was good at school. Sid Vicious was in my photography class at school before he joined the Sex Pistols, and when he was a sort of Brian Ferry lookalike. And so he was my photography partner at school, and we'd just take pictures of each other when we'd go off on assignments and things.
Okay.
And then I'd take pictures of my girlfriend or other people, just, you know, we'd go off on just jaunts, taking pictures. He came over to my house once, met my mother, scared her and her American friends when they were having tea. Yeah. I sold him my leather jacket.
All right.
And he gave me a pair of white pointed 50s American pimp shoes as well in return.
So I wanted to ask you, because I'm just interested in it. So you told me this before when you came, I think it was 2 years ago now, to our studio. But so, you know, the drugs and stuff, you know, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Keith Haring clearly had more of a hold on it, and it was more casual. But as you mentioned, and I've heard this from so many people, but I think, you know, you might have had some sessions with Hambleton on substances. Like, when did it become noticeable when he went from casually using it to actually this guy's fully under the curse of drugs?
I would think probably it would probably have to be about 1991, probably, when people, we'd go out together and he would be sort of nodding off. So I was like, oh, you can't nod off here. We're in some fabulous club and you can't do that. And then, you know, the owner of the club or the manager would say, you know, take Richard home. He's not, can't have people nodding off in MK when there's, you know, Robert De Niro here, and it just brings the whole thing down. So then I sort of stopped going out with him. I'd come over and visit him at his house, and we'd hang out. I'd watch him paint, and we'd talk about his pictures and stuff, and maybe do some coke or something. But it wasn't. I didn't really want to go out in public with him, because it was just, I don't really want to be out with somebody who's nodding off in public. It doesn't look good on me. And then you know, people stop inviting me to things because, oh, you're going to bring Richard. And so I had to stop seeing him out in public.
Yeah. Did you ever, you mentioned coke, I mean, like things like heroin, was that anything that you should do
definitely.
together?
It was heroin and coke, yeah. But, you know, I'd come over and stay for a few hours and then go, and then he'd phone me the next day and say, oh, why don't you come over again? And I go over, and he hadn't been to bed. He'd just been up all night painting, and then you'd be kind of the worst way. And he says, oh, let's do some more drugs. And I'd be like, no, I did them yesterday. I'm not into doing drugs every day. For me, it's like a kind of a party thing. We do it and then leave it alone. And he was like, no, let's get some more, you know.
Even on things like heroin?
Yeah, definitely. He was, you know.
And he was shooting or smoking it?
He was snorting it.
Snorting heroin?
Yeah. So that's how I left it with him, and that's how I kind of ended it, wow. You know. And, you know, he started shooting up quite soon after that, I think. And And then the other people stopped going over. The dinners started getting less and less. There'd be, his visitors would be fewer and far between. He was getting more hard up for money. And then, so he was making more paintings and selling them, but then the price would go down because he was just sort of swapping them for drugs. So then when you flood the market like that, then you can't get enough money for them. Mm. And so then he got thrown out of that studio, and then he got another one that was smaller, and then he became homeless, and he was living around in various places. He lived in the down steps of a basement building, and he just put a tarp over the steps bit area, and he was living there, and it was the summer, and he was still painting. And even if I'd see him around and I'd talk to him, and he was completely, like a Walking Dead kind of character, but he'd be carrying a bit of wood he was going to paint on, or he was like, oh, come down and see what I'm doing this, that, and the other. So, somehow he found money for paint and paintbrushes, and so his brain was still ticking. His body was getting more and more...
Because he was almost like hunched over towards him.
Yeah, he looked like Quasimodo. I mean, he was a bit taller than me when I met him. Very good-looking guy. Great personality. And then the last time I saw him was like 2015 or something. And he was like bent all the way over.
And he couldn't stand up?
Well, he could stand up, but he couldn't. He was just sort of hunched over, and he wouldn't let me take his picture. I said, well, how about if I just take it from the back while you're painting? And he's like, no, just...
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why. I know why. He didn't want to be seen like that, but there were other people that had taken pictures of him. But I think I had pictures of him when it was his peak, and it was actually... Maybe it's good I don't have, I've got the pictures of the upside rather than the downside.
Where did you see him in 2015, the last time you...
I think it was his studio on Orchard Street.
Okay.
And there was some Russian girl who was his assistant or girlfriend or whatever. She was there.
A bit of both.
Yeah, something like that. That's when I went and got the Walking Woman signed. And then I came back a few months later and tried to get him to sign the head, and he just, I don't know, he either purposely avoiding me or just so unreliable that, I just come and she would say, come over on, 3:00, and I get there at 3:00 and wasn't there. Come back at 4, come back at 5, come back at 6. Oh, he'd come back at 10. Come back tomorrow. I did that for a few days, and I was just like, I can't spend walking around with this thing under my arm, back and forth, trying to get this thing signed. And it was...
And do you remember where you were when you got the phone call in 2017 that he had passed away?
No, I think probably here in England. Okay. I got called by, I think it was Andy, or because they used the Pick the Walking Woman for the show here in London. And he would phone me up periodically now and then to see if I was interested in selling the picture. And I didn't really want to sell it back then. I quite liked it. It was starting to grow on me, and I had it pinned up on the doorway. I don't remember where I was. It was probably London.
And do you remember... can you imagine how you were feeling at the time? Was it like a shock? Was it probably best because he was a victim of his own lifestyle? I was just
amazed that he was still alive. I didn't think, he didn't die. Because when I did see him, I just thought, no, he's not going to last the week. And every time, when I phone and speak to the Russian girl, I was like, is he still alive? Yeah, he's still alive, yeah. He says, come over and see him. And I come over and he wouldn't be there, or he'd be sleeping, or he'd be, unavailable or something, or just not there. And I was amazed that he made it that long. And when he did die, I thought, it's quite a relief, really. I mean, it was inhuman that he was still going on. I don't know what the drugs must have been preserving him. I think probably maybe the only thing keeping him going. I thought maybe he stopped, his body wouldn't be able to handle it.
Yeah.
It's the glue holding him together and pulling him apart at the same time.
Yeah. Well, people say he might have pickled himself.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah, stopped the spread of cancer or stopped all the other problems that he had in his body.
But, it was eventually going to get to him, and his nose was hanging off, his arms were bleeding, and various bandages, and it was just a scary mess, really.
Yeah. I know we slightly touched on this already, but you acquiring these pieces for only relatively small amount of money. Back then it might have been a lot, but really and truly for art today, I mean, you wouldn't even be able to buy a limited edition with that now. And now the way the market's gone with auctions, private sale, big, there's some big results out there. I believe with the Rizzoli book that comes out in June, that's going to bring a lot more awareness, a lot more exposure to the market. There's talks of the Hollywood movie. I spoke to Oren Jacoby directly on my podcast, and he confirmed they are going to convert it into a Hollywood movie, and a big A-lister will be playing Richard Hambleton. And then finally, the Richard Hambleton Global World Tour, which is this experience. And again, I know you're not an art expert, but surely a man that has seen, the culture and the streets and all these other artists back then, including some of the elites like Jean-Michel Basquiat, Keith Haring, with all this stuff, in the pipeline, logically, prices are probably going to go up. There's going to be a lot more new people coming into the market because they're finding out about Hambleton and discovering who he is for the first time. And I just think it's amazing. Like, to get his story out there is such an important thing for us.
Yes, no, it will be. I'm looking forward to it. It's the first I've heard of the film. I'd be really curious to see who's going to play him. But it's a good film. It's a good story anyway, and there's enough. So it's not a documentary. It's strictly a drama. So I mean, there's already a documentary. So yeah, why not a drama? Like making Netflix stories about all sorts of people now that
they are
not nearly as interesting as Richard and not nearly as talented. So, I can't wait for it. Yeah, and his prices will go up as they did when the film came out. I mean, prices I was being offered for my pictures kind of were doubling about every 6 months. So
for the Richard Hambleton ones.
Yeah, and. So I was like, well, that's great. And then the film came out, and I was like, okay, the film's out. It may go up, but this is probably a good time to sell it now. If it goes up, it probably won't go up for a few years. But I'm always wrong on these things. Mm-hmm. I'm not much of an art dealer, but yeah.
So with Hambleton and his style, what were your favourite artworks by him?
I like I think the most memorable are the rainy seascapes. They always reminded me of, looking through a trawler or a warship windscreen in the middle of a gale in a stormy sea, with the lines going through them. And those are always the most exciting, I thought, and probably not the most well known, but I think those may outlast the other ones just because they are maybe more accessible to to an average person who's not into eccentric or extreme art. The shadow figures are slightly scary, might scare little children. A seascape is sort of scary in a more foreboding way. The landscapes, my friend has one in New York that she bought from him in the 90s on silver leaf. And that's very beautiful and serene. But I think the seascapes have the drama and the scariness of the figures, but in a more painterly fashion.
We actually have one next door. I don't know if you walked next door before you came in here, but
I didn't have a chance to look at it.
I'll show you. There's a client coming tonight actually to look at it, and And it does seem like the seascapes or some of the beautiful works, the much larger ones, they're the ones that a lot of collectors want, which is funny because he's actually known for his shadow figures, hence the Shadow Man documentary. But I think people that really understand his market over time start looking at the seascapes and the landscapes because it's like it's totally different to what he's known for, and maybe that might be a bit more rare, a bit more cooler. But I think you can't ignore things like the rodeos and...
No, well, the rodeos, yes. I didn't really see many of the rodeos at his studio. Maybe he'd already shipped them off to galleries and things. I mean, the thing with the shadow figures, especially this, is that they're very easy to forge. So there's probably quite a few forgeries out there. You see them on eBay and stuff, and because it's just black paint, white canvas, splush, and there you go. But with the beautiful ones, they're layered, they're built up, they take a lot of time, a lot of craft. His skill as a painter really shows up during those, and there's a lot more technical skills put into them, more thought.
And some of the materials he was using, like you said, the silver leaf and things like that. I mean, it really is a true work of art.
Yes, yeah. I mean, when I saw him doing these little gold leaf things, and he had them sort of beautifully lit on little pedestals, and walk through this little tunnel of things hanging down, and little pedestals with these little pinpoint spotlights on these things. I thought they're beautiful. They're like little Fabergé things, but they look good from a distance, and up close I was like, they just look a bit kind of sloppy, you know. They look beautiful from a distance, but you know, it's like a teacup that he's found on the street and gold leafed it and spludged some varnish on it. But I never see those anywhere. Those are probably very rare. I don't know if he ever continued with them, or if anybody bought them, or if they were just like pilfered from his studio, or if he smashed them all up and put them in the bin. I don't know.
And a question that I asked a lot of people that knew Hambleton, Basquiat, Haring, and they just know the street art movement. Obviously, no one can guarantee anything in life, apart from the old famous saying, death and taxes. But, you know, Keith Haring, Jean-Michel Basquiat, their markets have absolutely boomed over the last few years. I mean, Jean-Michel Basquiat, a piece going for $110.5 million in auction to a billionaire. I mean, that's a crazy amount of money. Do you think Hambleton can get anywhere near that over the next 10, 15, 20 years?
I don't know. I'm not the person to ask. I mean, it would be nice. It would be great. He deserves it. He's got enough. I suppose he's got 3 or 4 bodies of work. Keith Haring really just had one style, and it was on everything. It was a smaller or larger or in different colors. It was political. Some of it was pornographic, but there was basically one thing. Basquiat's pieces, there were probably, a couple of different periods ago. Okay, that's early stuff. That's later stuff. This is stuff he didn't want to do on canvas, but it's all. And then this is before he did the Xerox stuck on things. Whereas Hambleton did have, 2 different. And the landscapes are very different from the shadow figures. So there's variety and depth. The beautiful pictures are very different from the shadow figure pictures. And there's a progression.
Yeah.
I think there's enough depth and interest to hold people's, so if you have a shadow figure, you think, well, I might like to have a seascape, or I might like to have a landscape, or I'd like to have a beautiful picture. So, the scope for collecting. And then there's the signs he did, and so.
Was there any other artists back in the 80s, or when you first started connecting with these great artists, anyone else that you used to connect with and hang out with?
Kenny Scharf.
Okay, I know him.
He's still alive, still making great pictures, but he's still alive. He's turning out stuff. His prices aren't that high, but they'll get there. And his stuff is fun. It's not political in any way, which can be good, can be bad, but
colourful, vibrant smiles, you know, some of his characters.
Children like Keith Haring stuff. They loved it, because it was fun and they could read. It was like hieroglyphics. Children understood it more. Basquiat stuff was a bit harder to read into. I look at something and go, oh, I thought he's thinking about this, and somebody else thought something completely different.
Yeah.
But Keith Haring stuff is fairly like straightforward.
Yeah.
And Kenny Scharf stuff is just visual, but beautifully done.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like Kenny Scharf. I've tried to reach out to him actually a few times to do a podcast, but I'm just not too sure whether he'll be up for it or not. Same with Futura actually, because Nemo Labrizzi, who has done a few podcasts with me, and he actually came last year to the Ham Yard Hotel where we done a private screening of The Shadow Man, and then he was up on stage talking with me, and he said, he's a fantastic artist, Kenny Scharf. You know Nemo?
I met him a couple of times. He had a benefit for. It was probably about 3 years ago in New York, in Tribeca. He had a show. He had a Hambleton drawing, and he had quite a few pieces of really nice art. And it was a benefit for a friend of his that was getting kicked out of her apartment or something. And so he organized a show just very quickly. Eric got an invitation. He gave it to me. I got to meet him. It was a fun event.
Yeah.
But he's in the art world in New York.
What was the back in the day in the 80s? What was the craziest thing you ever saw, either with these artists or in the streets, or stuff that you just witnessed back then?
I guess the craziest things were. Keith Haring built a brick wall. Well, he had a brick wall built diagonally across the darkroom, across the dance floor area. It's probably 10, 20 meters long in a pyramid shape, and then he came in and painted both sides of it. And then after it was done, just got sledgehammered down to pieces. That was it. The end of it. So,
what a shame.
Yeah, what a shame.
All that money just gone down the drain.
6 weeks later, Art's theme was finished, and they're onto another one. And Basquiat's window, he had a window. He had stuff on the inside, on the outside. Keith Haring had another thing that was like a shop mannequined dummy, just the torso and the legs, and it was just on a pedestal in the lounge, and people were leaning on it and putting their drinks on it, and kind of, it was just there. It was just something you'd lean on. Keith Haring thing. No great care was taken of it. So, wish I'd nicked it actually, but didn't.
Did you ever own some Keith Harings, or was it just Basquiat and Hambleton? Just
Basquiat and Hambleton. Yeah. No, I didn't have any Keith Haring, and it just never occurred to me to ask him, and it never occurred to me. He was sick, and when somebody said, "Oh, he's in the hospital, he's really sick," I just thought, "Oh, he'll get better and he'll come out." And how wrong was I?
So he just literally fell cursed to AIDS and deteriorated.
Yeah, and I just wasn't really thinking about death. It wasn't really on my. I just didn't like hospitals or anything. I thought, no, I can't go in there, and I'll go next week or something, because Eric's sister was like, who went out with Basquiat. She was like, "Oh, I'm going to the hospital. Do you want to come along?" I said no, but she said, "Oh, do you have any photographs of him?" I was like, "Yeah, you can have these and take them in there." So, probably would have signed them for me or something, or drawn on them or something, and just didn't go.
Yeah.
Next week I wasn't there or something, and I never showed up, never saw him again.
Yeah. I know it's all hindsight, but turning back the hands of time, owning some big Jean-Michel Basquiat's, Hambleton's, Keith Haring, be sitting on a huge empire today.
Yeah, no, it would have been good had I been more concerned with money at the time or the future. I think when you're like 24, 25, you're not really concerned with like your future. You'll just think living in the moment, enjoying life, buying a bit of art or having a bit of art. Just thought, I'll never, you just don't think that far ahead at all. You get something signed. What's it going to be worth? A couple hundred. I can't be bothered to do it. I have to carry it home afterwards, and I don't really want to be asked to do that. I went to a Banksy show in London, I think in about 2000, and he had prints that you could buy for £100 unsigned or £150 signed. And I was like, they're really good. Maybe I should get one. I was like, should I get a signed one? Or shall I get an unsigned one? And I was sitting there thinking, well, shall I get one? Which one shall I get? And then my friend said, well, let's go and have a drink and then we'll come back. And then, so we went and had a drink and he's like, is this band playing somewhere? And then we never went back and got either of them. So,
I mean, the unsigned ones are now trading over £300,000, I think.
Really, it's amazing.
Crazy.
I mean, there were animals. I mean, it was the first time I'd heard of Banksy, and he said, there's funny artists in East End's having a show and there's going to be animals there. So it was like a pig with police car stripes on it. There was a cow with McDonald's stenciled on the side. And then I think the show was only up for a day before it got closed down. But we saw it anyway. So
the guy, Steve Laderidis, I think helped put that together.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And it wasn't there rats and stuff?
That was another show on Westbourne Grove. I went to that one where they had skeletons and rats and his paintings around. I took some pictures of that one. And at his latest one down in South London somewhere, Wapping, or don't know where it was, but it was out in a closed down department store. So they had sort of spray cans you could buy, or coat hangers, or bits of rock, or they had a fountain, and they had these guys with brown coats standing outside who were kind of guiding people, and you could sort of see, you couldn't go into the shop, but you could buy these things online.
Because he had a show in Covent Garden as well. I don't think it was him who put it together, it was people that acquired his artwork, but it was really pretty good. Wasn't a big show, but
I didn't see that. No, I just thought, I've seen all these things for free. I'm not sure if I need to go pay to see them now. Probably should have just gone anyway. I wish I'd gone to the Dismaland thing. In
Dismaland,
that sounded really good. Or the West Bank hotel thing in Israel. That would have been Palestine. That would have been great to see that too. But sometimes you don't have the money to do traveling off and going to see all these things. Yeah.
Do you see a lot of similarities a little bit with Banksy and him kind of taking inspiration from Hambleton? Because there is that connection between Richard Hambleton, Black the Rat, Banksy, because Black's been on my podcast as well, and he said, living or dead, the best artist out there is Hambleton. The only artist that he bought was Richard Hambleton. And Banksy, I think, on record a few times saying, every time I go to do some more work, I find out that Black the Rat has done this 5-10 years ago. And there's definitely a connection between them all. Do you see any other connections that maybe I'm not picking up?
Well, apart from them being, the first time I saw Banksy, I saw the two policemen kissing, and I thought, that's really, and it was a life-size screen print on the wall, and I thought that kind of reminds me of somebody a bit Hambleton-ish, and I thought it's a good idea. Stenciled, that's good. And then the more I saw of his things, the more I heard who he was, and I thought, it's good. But I can't see anything definite from the styles, because one was a stencil and one was a freehand painter. I don't know what Banks is like as a painter. I don't know if he does everything he does is stencil, but he has good ideas, and he has a sense of humor, and he's political as well. So I think he's held up.
He catches the eye of the media and also PR companies. Talking about your own work then, Ben, made some notes here that in 2003, Camberwell College of Art, you got a qualification from, and then also the American Institute of Conservation. So you actually conserve, books and pictures, etc. So what is it you do now as a profession, and how is like your own art and photography gone since the 80s?
I started doing conservation since 2000. So I worked at the Maritime Museum, and then I've been freelance mostly since then, works of art on paper, and that's always been my day job. But recently, the photography licensing and the sale of prints has sort of overtaken monetarily wise, which is good because it's more fun going to exhibitions of your work, traveling to see parties and events where museums are using your pictures, talking, giving you a few talks in Australia at the big Basquiat Haring exhibition down there a couple of years ago. Very nerve-wracking, talking on a panel with people who have PhDs and things, and or giving them, walking through and talking about stuff. I'm not the best talker, but I think people enjoyed it anyway. Between the 80s when I took all these pictures of Basquiat and Hambleton, I mostly did landscapes, desert landscapes. I decided I'm fed up with photographing people. I've had enough partying, enough people. I want to get away from all that. So I spent a couple of years just driving around the desert, taking landscapes and just being away from people.
Yeah.
Which is good to get my head clear. And then I worked with Eric designing his restaurants and nightclubs and things in New York, and I think there was one in Los Angeles as well. So that was a nice job.
Yeah.
And I could take pictures again that I wanted to take rather than doing them. Being a photographer only, you end up taking pictures that you don't really want to take because people have to pay you for something, and they don't really want to pay you for the pictures that you want. They want to pay you with the pictures that they want, and I just sort of lost interest in it. Now I take pictures of things that I want to take, and I'm much happier doing that.
And the artists back in the day, they were completely happy with you, being there, taking photos of them, especially if they were doing it on the streets. They were fine with that?
Yeah, they were fine with that. They, because I think, I'd see them so often, they knew that I was just going to take a couple of pictures and then walk away or talk to them. I wasn't distracting them or disturbing them. I wasn't getting into their face. I wasn't somebody who wasn't part of the scene. I was the same age as Basquiat and Haring, so we were kind of the same generation. Warhol, I took loads of pictures of him, but he was like older people. He was like the Studio 54 crowd. They were old people, and we weren't really interested in hanging out with them. But
what was he like, Andy Warhol?
Well, to me, he didn't really have much of a personality. He was just always very polite. I'd say, "Can I take your picture?" And he said, "Sure. Where shall I stand?" And I'd say, "Okay, here's fine," or whatever. But I never really got into a conversation with him about anything. I've got pictures of him with Basquiat and with Keith Haring, and but he was always just sort of set decoration. We got him to do things at area, like we got him to stand in this glass-fronted room just for the evening. He was the work of art, and the little thing on the window said "Work of art in progress, invisible sculpture," and there was an empty plinth, and you just stood next to it, and people were tapping on the window like he was a chimp in a zoo or something, and people were waving and taking pictures and saying, "Oh, that's Andy Warhol." No, it's not really. Yeah, it's him. And just there he was, and people would gawk at him and then move on to the next display that was a Basquiat display or a lizard or an owl or something to do with whatever theme it was. He quite enjoyed doing that, I think. I mean, you couldn't have paid him to do it, but he did it for free for us. So that was fun.
Allegedly, Andy Warhol approached Richard Hambleton to do a portrait of him, and he turned him down.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I heard, and it just shows that Hambleton again wasn't someone that needed the recognition sometimes, or nor could he be bought. Maybe he was a true artist, and that's why I think a lot of people now respect and adore him. Maybe not at the time because he was a pain in the backside, victim of his own kind of choices, lifestyle, and how he used to act and be. But now, like on reflection, you know, he's as I said, true artist, and I think that's why a lot of people are definitely going to take him more seriously as time goes on.
Yeah, I mean, I can't somehow imagine him doing a portrait of Andy, or what it would look like even.
Or I think it was Andy doing it of Hambleton.
Oh, okay. Maybe when he was younger. I can't imagine doing a picture of him. It was all Quasimodo-like. It's not really.
Andy Warhol would have been dead and gone by then. But yeah, it must have been when he was
so
in
80s. So yeah, Andy died in 90? So Richard was still, on the edge. Yeah, probably. Yeah, that would have been interesting. Like I can see him maybe on the front cover of Interview, being a bit glammed up or something, something. But maybe Andy wanted him to pay for it or something, because Andy was doing pictures of anybody who would cough up money. But maybe if he asked you, then he wouldn't charge you. I don't know how that works. But
yeah.
Or you'd have to do two, one for him and one for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know how that works.
I heard as well that Basquiat would swap 3 to 4 of his own works for one Richard Hambleton, which I think shows that Jean-Michel Basquiat held Richard Hambleton in high regard. And also with him doing his Samo skull over the top of a Richard Hambleton shadow figure, again, alludes to the fact that he was leveraging Hambleton to try and get his own recognition.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, that's plausible. I mean, that's quite plausible. I mean, Basquiat was doing stuff around 1980, but he wasn't really well known. And I think, Hambleton sort of got further ahead than he did in terms of his prices and his gallery. But he wasn't far behind him by, caught up quite quickly. I'm surprised they weren't spending time together doing drugs together, because we could see it, but they were different personalities maybe. It would have been interesting to have a picture of them together. That would have completed my set of artists together. But they must have, I don't ever remember them hanging out or being even in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I was at MK with Hambleton a few times, and at Area, and Basquiat was there, but they never, if they were there at the same time, they were never talking or hanging out.
Would have been great if they would have done a few collaborations.
That would have
together.
been amazing. Yeah, I could see that, apart from the ones on the walls. I know the photograph I have, the Hambleton picture, does have a skull on it. And I know there's another photograph of another one where there's also a skull painted on it. But I'm assuming Basquiat did both of them, because he looked a bit like his
work. Where can people find your work, Ben, if you want them to come and visit, admire, and potentially purchase some of your own work?
Probably through me, benbuchanan.co.uk, something.
Yeah.
Or Instagram, Ben Buchanan Photo.
Okay.
That's probably the best way. Or they can go to the Peter Harrington Gallery, but it'll probably cost more there. Okay,
cool. And developments, goals, ambitions, things that you're going to do over the next few years, Ben? What can we be expecting from you?
I would like to travel more and sell more photographs. Maybe sell the whole archive to somebody at some point. So I don't know, so I could retire maybe, or I won't retire from taking pictures, but then I won't have to deal with the archive anymore because I get a lot of inquiries about it.
Okay, cool. Well, I really appreciate you coming down here, sharing some of your stories. Again, we like to pride ourselves on making content, being forward facing, educating our audience and giving them value, and conversations like this definitely do that. So thank you very much for agreeing to do this, and it's been a great talk with you, mate.
Okay, great.
All right,
good to be here.
Cool. All right, thank you very much, and I look forward to getting the feedback from the audience and seeing where this episode goes. All right.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Ben. Cheers.